struggle with this a little bit because there was this idea of Mother's Day and perhaps those that weren't, wanted to have children and weren't able to, or for others who mothered indirectly. So basically anybody that provides a heart for mothering for others, I honor you on this Mother's Day. So thank you guys for being here. It's good to see everyone. I don't know what we may have a lot of people out today for Mother's events, but glad everybody's here. So does anybody want to share anything that happened in your week? Remembering, of course, you're on YouTube, but did anything great or not so great, or a struggle, a challenge, or a victory happen this week that you'd like to share with our community here? As you guys are thinking about that, I do want to share for those in Central California, remember we have a get together tomorrow night in the backyard of Carol Johannes. Wendell, if you want to fly in from Hawaii to join us, that would be great. We have a spare room you can use for overnight. No, I wish we could invite everybody to come join us, but it is sadly we can't do that. But I encourage you to find people in your area to get together with. But if you're somewhere near Central California, we actually have one person who got a B&B room is coming in from Sacramento to be with us. So that's really, really cool. I think Bob's coming up from Bakersfield too, and the Kleinhammer's coming from Lemoore. So people are making their trek to get with us. So that'll be fun.
So I was going to share one really nice thing this week. I don't know how much I've said, but we have one daughter who has been found to be autistic as an adult, which is interesting that you don't see that until later. That's a whole story. But she went back to school a little over a year ago. School has been a struggle because she didn't understand why she couldn't handle classroom noise and presence and stuff. And now that she knows where it's coming from, she's managing it a lot better. She has tools to handle it better. And we were delighted to see her selected for 2 department scholarships to help her pay for next year. So, and here are the really cool things that the people were saying about her accomplishments in what she's been doing for the last year. So, after watching her struggle, that was a particularly rewarding evening.
That's awesome. Congratulations. Cool. Anybody else want to share anything today?
So shameless plug for the breakout rooms afterwards. We were in our breakout room last week, and Heidi mentioned David Artman, Grace Saves All, which is a podcast. I have been eating that up this week. It's been wonderful. So thank you to Heidi, and definitely a recommendation for anybody else who's interested in Christian universalism. The guy is a very droning voice, not particularly engaging to listen to, but the content's excellent.
Christian universalism is not an oxymoron?
No, it turns out. But I'll post a link here in just a second. No, but basically in a nutshell, he's taking the approach of and again, this plays into other things we've been deconstructing, but Christ's sacrifice, to the extent that that was to pay for sin, was to pay for everybody's sin, and therefore we all have access to heaven. That grace is wide and deep and broad enough for everyone. And I'm just getting into a little bit of kind of how he's addressing the issue of there being some sort of judgment period for, based on how people have acted on earth, but that in some way there's a good end for all. So really enjoying listening to that, enjoying that they're getting into some of those thorny verses that as evangelicals that wanted a distinct heaven and hell, we always just tried to kind of ignore and keep moving past because they didn't work well with our theology. And he's kind of diving into a lot of this. So it's been good and interesting and thought-provoking.
Interesting. It really is where I'm landing. Like I struggle greatly with universalism in that, to put it in sort of crass, slightly silly terms, I say, so that means me and Donald Trump end up in the same place, like, come on. So maybe it's just my human need for justice. I want there to be like some version of purgatory somewhere, where, and that is sort of in the Christian universalist belief system, that there is a hellish judgment at the end of this season of life as we transition into the next, that there is a reckoning, I would say. And I always like to say, most of the time we see fire in the Bible, it is a purifying or holy element rather than a punishment tool. And so I kind of see hellfire in biblical terms as something that purifies us and burns off the dross of earth and will leave us spotless and pure and perfect, just like fire does with silver or an element like that. So that's kind of been my belief for a while. I guess I need some judgment at the end. I need to know that there's going to be some reckoning of, and I believe, sorry, this is not what I didn't mean to get off on this topic, but it's an interesting one that I believe we're here for a purpose. I don't think it's just happenstance that we end up. And so we're going to be judged against that purpose. We're not going to be judged against a set of rules and a rule book. We're going to be judged against the purpose of life, I believe. Brenda, you want to chime in on that?
Or just, I find myself on this question coming back to God acting like a parent. And parents don't banish their children just because they're bad, because they do bad things. They look for ways to bring them back into being right and being good and being, out of love. And I just have this feeling, little like when the kid finally grows up enough, they go, oh, wow, mom and dad were right. And when we see God, we're going to have such an experience, because I think we will all be surprised at exactly who God is, in the sense that none of our imaginations are sufficient. We may then, those who've had a chance to experience God's acting in our lives, his guidance and that kind of stuff, will find a familiar heart. But when it says in Philippians 2, every knee shall bow, I think it's like, oh, wow, we will just be taken by an amazing, oh, this is what I have been longing for. And I don't know a human being, and I think even Donald Trump, as the one that I have griped the most about in the last 5-6 years, even Donald Trump is going to have an awareness. And so could God take somebody like him or whatever and bring that person to a place of, no, this is what's right. And, judgment isn't punishment. Judgment is bringing justice. Judgment is discerning what's right and bringing it to light. And so anyway, all that to say, Paul, I agree with a lot of what you're saying, but it's not something that is the way I think I was raised to see it.
Yeah. And of course you're speaking about healthy parent-child relationships, not parents who are going to beat the hell, literally beat the hell out of their children. Yeah.
No, I am talking about the kind of parent that we all should be.
Yeah,
you know,
I have
the healthy parents.
I have Christians fairly frequently say, well, don't you correct your children when they make mistakes? And, you know, when we're talking about God as the evangelical belief of God as a good father. And I say, yes, yet never once have I thought I'm going to set them on fire for all of eternity for not worshiping me well and doing what I tell them to do. So that makes me a better father than that evangelical belief of God or evangelical belief of God. Sorry to go there. Wendell, I see your hand up there.
Yeah, so the fire, right, is so important to fundamentalists or even to our thinking of some kind of binary outcome. So Isaiah 33 is going to tell us directly who the fire is for. And we might be surprised. I'm just going to leave it at that. It's 33, 14, and 15.
Okay. So I want to dive into a discussion that I guess my older days, I prayed about this, but I really did kind of ponder this a little bit. And I thought, do we delve into really difficult conversations, or are we concerned about what that can rot in our midst? And I thought, well, that's kind of our commitment, right? To delve into difficult conversations. So I'm going to go into one of the most difficult of difficult topics, and that is particularly in the backdrop of what's going on here in the United States and the response of content that I've put on TikTok this week. I would say abortion is a major topic of conversation. And so I just want to say I'm diving into this with trepidation of knowing this is a very emotional, passionate issue, that I respect people who believe that abortion is the death of a human being. I can respect that. But one of the ways I like to look at the issue is, if being a single issue voter around abortion is God's command for us as Christians, I believe that should be prevalent in Scripture. That should be so easy and clear to see in the Bible. And as a Christian and a church leader, and then ultimately a pastor, I sort of used to wrestle with, why am I never animated by this abortion thing? And, when our churches would have people come in and do all the stuff and show all the horrifying videos. And I'm like, man, this issue has never animated me. I've never felt like I need to get up and beat people up over, being pro-choice. And so, I used to say, there's something wrong with me, God. And so I did this really dangerous thing one day. I decided to read the Bible and really see what the Bible said about abortion. And for me, and again, this is arguable, we can have discussions, and so I want to make sure we're civil in this. But for me, I found the Bible to be incredibly agnostic on the topic, if not even leaning towards the pro-choice side. And so I just want to share a little bit of how I see the Bible on this issue, to give us permission to say, is being a single issue voter, voting for terrible people for office just because of this one issue, what God commands of us? And out of that, is it okay for me to use things like calling people baby murderer as a part of that process, something that Jesus would endorse were he here in the flesh today? So everybody have all that background, and you can disagree with me. This is arguable, but this is just something I want to show for people who, like me, may have had a period where I really struggle with, am I okay with God in this issue? So I'm going to show you a little bit of what I share in my Deconstruction U classes about this issue, just very, very briefly. And so, if nothing else, no matter how you feel about the issue, I feel the church has done a very poor job of portraying the heart of Jesus around the issue of abortion. And I have gay marriage when I talk about this as well in my classes. But I posit this, that I feel very confident to say the Bible never clearly says life begins at conception. There is not, you can argue some passages and we'll go through that, but I believe it's impossible to argue that the Bible is clearly ever stating that life begins at conception. And so let me see where I am on my board here. And so sometimes I would say the church is sincere about its beliefs, but sincerely wrong in its execution of them. And so that's kind of my premise here. So let me talk about some of the passages that we use. Hang on, can I get this out of the way so you can see this well? So my premise is, if abortion is God's number one issue, the Bible should clearly reflect that. Again, let me see if I can get this out of the way. Let's try this one more time. So Jeremiah 1 is a passage that people use often to say, see, life begins at conception. It says, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you, and before you were born, I consecrated you. Now, this is a passage where God is speaking, and I believe it's a poetic speaking. It's a poetic rendition of God speaking. But one thing that I've always thought interesting in using this about an anti-abortion passage is this word before. It says, before I formed you in the womb. It doesn't say, as I created life in you in the womb, I knew you. It says, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. The Bible talks about God knowing us, that we are created in the heart and mind of God in the Christian story before the laying of the foundation of the earth. And so if we're using this as a life begins at conception passage, it actually doesn't say that. It actually says God knows the people he's going to create before they're ever in the womb. And even in other passages, it says before the laying of the foundation of the earth. So I would argue that Jeremiah 1 is not a life begins at conception passage. Psalm 139, the same. It says, for you formed my inward parts, you knitted me together in my mother's womb. And so this is used often as a see life begins at conception passage. But it goes on to say, my frame was not hidden, I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth. So again, I've heard this said that, again, it's talking about the laying of the foundations of the earth. Like God knew us and was creating the earth for us in that process as a part of the Christian story. And then it goes on to say this, which I think is very interesting in the discussion. It says, in your book were written, every one of them, the days that were formed me, when as yet there was none of them. And so what I think is, again, as you're using this as an anti-abortion passage in the Bible, or a life begins at conception passage, it says that God knows every day of our life. This is the Christian belief system, that God already knows how our life is going to end as he, in the Christian vernacular, is creating it. So therefore, I've always kind of asked my anti-abortionist friends, well, doesn't Jesus know the abortion's going to happen then? God, isn't the creator aware that the abortion is coming? And wouldn't a big, omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent God be able to create a destiny for that soul, if there's a soul in that being, even with the abortion? Or is God sort of shackled by human choice and therefore destiny stolen from a being? I think this says, even if that is a being with a soul in it, then God is aware of what's coming and will create a way to build a destiny for that being. So these are some of the other passages. Thou shalt not kill. Again, I think there's nothing inherently that says life begins conception in that passage, and is a command against a pro-choice belief. And we'll talk more about, since that is a Jewish passage, we'll talk more about the Jewish belief system around this in just a second. Luke 1, they say, because it says John leaped in his mother's womb, that shows that that's life. But we do know from biology that a fetus will respond to a father's voice. And we also know that the Bible anthropomorphizes a lot of things, that the Bible talks about trees clapping their hands. A donkey talked in the Bible, and certainly I'm not comparing any human being to any of those things. But we have to understand, again, if we're saying it's clear that God wants us to call pro-choice people baby murderers, we better make sure we know the Bible is telling us to live and portray ourselves and portray the message of Jesus in that way. A couple of other things to note: that Exodus 21 has a passage where the Bible seems, again, it's arguable, but seems to value a mother's life over a fetus, where it says if two men get in a fight and a pregnant woman is injured and she miscarries because of the fight, the one who injures and causes the miscarriage has to pay a fine. But if the mother is killed, that person has to pay with their life. So the point being in that passage that the mother's life is given more value in a judgment and a law than the fetus itself. Numbers 5 has a passage a lot of people like to use that say, see, God is even giving a permission to give an abortion. I'll let you read it and think about it yourself. I don't think that's actually what's happening in that passage. It's a whole nother thing, but just to be aware that some people do use this passage to say, see, God is giving Moses a potion that will kill a fetus. And that is, again, something you can argue for or against. I don't actually buy that passage as one I use often in this discussion, but just want you guys to be aware of it. And here is what is normally and the most prevalent belief of the Jewish religion and belief system, that the fetus does not carry a soul. It is not a soulish being. And most Jewish people believe, as my rabbi friends tell me, that the soul enters the body at first breath, or there is a Jewish belief system that the soul enters the body when the baby is viable. So somewhere at 7, 8 days, even up to 2 weeks, that the body has to be proven viable before God puts a soul into the body. And so the first breath argument is backed up in the Bible by saying Adam was fully formed, but he lived when God breathed into him. Ezekiel's army, we see the same thing. They're fully formed. They have all the tendons, all the bones, all the body, yet they're not alive. And Ezekiel is crying because they're not alive. Then it says, speak the wind of heaven into them, and the soul enters the body at first breath. That tends to be the Jewish belief system, and most Jewish people in America would be pro-choice. And in fact, Israel itself, the Jewish nation, is a pro-choice nation with legalized abortion. And not only is it legal, the government itself pays for those abortions. And that tends to be the Jewish belief system, leaning towards pro-choice. And so I say, if we're going to use Jewish scripture to back up our points, we ought to at least give some acknowledgement of what our Jewish friends believe in that. And I ultimately believe this too, that heaven's view of death is very different than ours. And as I did my search towards this, again, if God knows all our days before there is one, if that is true, then that is a God that's big enough to just take care of, be overwhelming for the whole situation, for the pregnant woman, for the man that was a part of that pregnancy, for the fetus, for everyone, that is a God that's so loving and big. Even death has been overcome. And so when heaven sees death as a transition from this world to the next, suddenly that fear that's put into people of like, you're destroying a being, starts to get lessened a little bit in like, maybe God, if God is what the evangelical Bible says that he is bigger than our understanding of this whole situation. And I'll finish with this more about the Jewish belief. Jewish law and Jewish custom allows for an ending of a pregnancy for distress of a mother. If a mother is in distress, particularly if her health or cases of rape, Jewish law provides for the ending of that abortion. And that distress also includes financial distress. By the way, if a mother feels she doesn't have the ability to financially care for the child, that was included in most discussions of a Jewish community. Almost universally pro-choice, nation of Israel has legalized abortion. And then there was the story of exposure in the Roman Empire. that was pretty prevalent when Jesus was on earth, that he would have known stories of Romans that left babies on the side of the road, which was legal, that a father, if a father didn't like a baby for any reason, was allowed to leave that baby on the local dump heap and allow it to be exposed to nature and either be carried off by an animal or die from the elements, or another family pick it up. And Christians really came against that practice in the early first and second and third century, by being willing to collect those babies up every day and care for them, even as they had little resource and were being oppressed. And it is said in some history that the Christian practice of collecting those exposed babies was what ultimately changed the heart of the culture towards exposure, and it was disallowed in 374, I believe the year was. So it was a very different process of standing against live babies being, just left to die, which is a very barbaric practice. They didn't go out and scream at people, shame people. They said, you know what, we'll let our love change the heart of the culture. So I just wanted to share that a little bit, as I see a little bit difference in scripture. Let me see if I can get out. Than I see in the practice of anti-abortionism in Christianity. And thought I would just share that. And that's sort of what my view into the Bible has seen of these passages. Again, I'm not saying you have to be pro-choice to be Christian or loved by God, but I do want to make sure we understand there is sort of a different way to view this. And so with just my exhortation to be incredibly civil and loving of one another and still able to share as we want to do. What do you guys think? What do you feel as you hear me share this? How are your feelings on abortion today, as we see there's great opportunity? We've had a draft memo come out that says our Supreme Court may very well overturn federal protections of abortion. How are you feeling about all of this in this season? And let's share together as we walk our lives together. So love to hear from you. Raise your hand in the Zoom room if you'd like to jump in, and we'll give you your chance to share what's on your heart. And I get that it's a scary subject and maybe some might feel unable to share, and you can talk in the chat as well, and we will not share what happens in the chat on the live feed, so you can share in there as well. All right, James has his hand up there. James, your thoughts?
Yeah, I've been pretty involved with this whole issue for years. Back in the 1980s, I was actually involved with the anti-abortion movement. I don't call it the pro-life movement because I never saw really much about the love for life within the movement. But I went to rallies and involved with Operation Rescue, and would go to clinics in Southern California, and other people would be screaming and yelling. I would just be off the side praying. But what happened with me was that as I would talk to people who had a different view, I realized that I really didn't have a very good argument. I tried to think of the logic and the scripture behind it, and I would talk to them. And like most people who are anti-abortion, I was motivated by emotion, what was in my heart more than what was in my head. I didn't really think it through. And I would go to leaders within the movement and say, how do you answer this question? And I became shocked at how few had thought it through themselves. It was all fire and no light. And so as the years have gone by, I've studied all those same scriptures. And I think I would probably add that there are two other arguments that I think that is often missed with this. One is the historical argument, which you kind of got into briefly, that historically the church certainly has not been radically anti-abortion. In the 1960s and early 1970s, the Southern Baptist Church, a number of the biggest leaders within the Southern Baptist Church, argued the life begins at first breath. Billy Graham was pro-choice. All these things, and there's a big background in how the anger over desegregation kind of led to the moral majority and that kind of stuff. The other thing I know I'll get too brief quickly because I know other people want to talk, is the argument of the logical argument that since more than 80% of fertilized eggs naturally abort, and if most Christians do believe that, you know, the fetus, a fetus or a child who dies automatically goes to heaven, that would mean that when we get to heaven, you know, most of the people we meet will never have breathed. They will never have spoken. They will never have chosen Jesus. So we'll be spending eternity with people who don't even know who Jesus was until they got there. So I think there are lots of issues with it. The other quick thing I'll say is that I don't think logic is going to make any difference in discussing with people. I mean, I don't see many people on issues like this that logic, rationality really makes any difference. People are so bought into this idea. It's become so much of a part of their nature that trying to discuss it with them logically really has very little difference. I think the most important thing is for us to individually recognize that the possibility that life could exist there and be consistently pro-life in every way that we can, but also be gracious.
Thank you, James. Laura and Charity.
So I was also part of the pro-life movement in the late 2000s, I guess, with Bound for Life and Lou Engle and the life bands and the life tape and the life, everything else that we could possibly write life on and stand somewhere obnoxious. I think we completely and utterly missed the point. And I think one of the biggest challenges I've had, because I was talking this through with our kids a little bit the other day, because we're coming back from Italy in the summer, and I was letting them know, you know, we're going to be landing likely right in the middle of massive protests because we're landing in late June. And is that life is complicated. And as much as we can build, you know, theological structural criticisms in one direction or the other, life is complicated. And my son, who's 9, was asking me today, you know, is God okay with war? I was like, well, you know, there's a very reasonable theological stance for pacifism. There's an equally reasonable theological stance for just war theory. And the reality is life is difficult. It's complicated. It's messy. One of my friends likes to talk about the supremacy of motive, and basically saying God is less concerned about what is the action as why. Why did you take that action? What was your heart space behind it? But I think whenever we get into, is this right? Is it wrong? Is this group right? Is it wrong? I think in large part we missed the point. And especially as we're coming into a season that, like I say, I fully expect is going to be a ton of protests and a ton of angry people and excited people and everything in between. I think we have to remember that love has to be the supreme thing here, whether it's love for the people that are pro-life, and this is their giddy moment of winning after 50 years of fighting, or whether it's love for people that this is a moment of absolute dismay, and it's going to cause massive heartache and pain and damage to tons and tons of people. And we have a friend who had an ectopic pregnancy, and they were in California, and so they were able to end the pregnancy. They're Orthodox. Their priest felt that it was okay. But I'm looking at some of these laws and going, if they were in a different state 6 months from now, they probably wouldn't have been able to. And their doctor told them, like, it was basically either the wife was going to die or they were both going to, or I should say either the baby was going to die or they were both going to die. And that was, from a medical point of view, that was the reality. So anyway, like I say, I think we have to come back to loving the people that are in front of us in whatever space they're in these coming months.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And yeah, well, I'll go. Wendell, I see your hand up. I'll let you go ahead and share.
Okay. Just wanted to thank you, Paul, for I guess, you know, doing the research you did and sharing how you feel. Kind of feels like you might be on the deck of the Star Trek Enterprise, kind of going where few have gone before. Brave for sure. Yeah. So, and then so to what James says about logic and understanding, I think there's a swath of 3 chapters in John where Jesus is trying to help his apprentices, trying to help his understudies to come away from intractable constructs, belief systems, and it's really hard. If you understand his attempts and what he's trying to do, basically he says, "Hey, look, I don't call you slaves anymore, because that's what you have been used to. I don't want you to be unthinking slaves. I want you to be friends." And that's in 15, but 14 and 16 frame it very well, that he's really trying to help them through their reasoning. And one last thing, and if you like Paul's theology in Romans 1, you're going to come across an equivalency that's hard to bear, which is murder and gossip are in the same verse.
Mhm.
And so, for people who have a false equivalence of what is bad and that sort of thing, it's right there, and we have to unpeel it.
I really appreciate that, Wendell, and appreciate what James and Lauren and you have shared, which is, in some ways, it doesn't matter what your belief is. How, in my mind, how the church has walked out its belief, the evangelical church has not advanced the kingdom of heaven and has been absolutely destructive to the gospel, to the message of Jesus. And so I reposted a video yesterday for this, and I would love to show you that, just kind of how I feel about how we've carried out and executed out of our beliefs. And again, I hold it humbly that if you believe it's a murder of a baby, as some very good friends of mine do, I can respect that. But how do you treat people out of that belief, I think is where a big part of the rub comes for me, and what I'm hearing and you guys share. So just let me share this, and we can chat about this a little bit. Oops, how do I get it to play?
Okay, here we go. Abortion, 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 part 2. My question to my staunch right-wing evangelical friends is, you can believe you're completely right in your stance on abortion, but is it still okay to say that someone who votes pro-choice is in favor of murder? Or that President-elect Joe Biden is a baby killer? Interesting conversation in Matthew chapter 5, verses 21 and 22. Jesus is talking to the right-wing believers of his day, and he makes this statement. He says, "You've heard it say in your law, don't murder. But I say to you, if there's anger in your heart towards someone and bad names for them comes out of that anger in your heart, you are the one more deserving of hellfire than that murderer." Maybe you believe you're exactly right in your stance on abortion, but could it be you're 100% wrong in how Jesus wants you to deal with people? Okay, here we go. Abortion, abortion, abortion.
So in the book of John, Samaritan village rejects Jesus outright. They won't even let him come through the village to travel to where he's going. And James and John are so offended in their passionate love for Jesus. They really want to display their love for Jesus and their offense at somebody who would reject their Lord and Savior. And so they say, "Jesus, we're going to call fire down from heaven to destroy this village, to show others what happens when you reject Jesus." And again, this is one of those disputed passages in the Bible. That's not in every manuscript, and but I love the tenor of the story, and in general find, like the woman caught in adultery story, they probably were common stories they told each other in the church, and they got added to the manuscript later. But we can hold that loosely whether it is or is not. But in the story, it says Jesus rebuked them, and that term, if you look into the definition of that term, it was like rebuked them in harshest terms. He's like, "Shut the F up, boys." His two of his closest 3 inner circle guys. He rebuked them, and he said, "You do not know the spirit you are of," is what the text literally says. And I believe what he was saying is, right now you're partnered with something not from heaven in any way whatsoever. If you believe I'm against those people who the Bible would often say who don't know their right from their left, who don't have any other options than what they're living out of, you're the one worthy of hellfire. You're the one worthy of rebuke. And I so believe this would be Jesus' heart about the anti-abortion extremism of the church today and its right-wing political roots and intertwining of our religion. He would say, I love your passion for me, but you're just completely wrong. And you need to stop doing that. So I see that in the text for ourselves, that you can believe however you want, but if it gives you permission to call people baby murderers, something is off and you're not advancing the gospel of heaven, my personal belief. Lauren and Charity.
So I was just going to add to just some of my experience of being a evangelical pastor's kid, of like, I had several friends who had approached me and were like, is this okay? I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know how I will support this child. And we're feeling extremely, I mean, like, I would say even suicidal about the situation, and like they just had no choice, and that they were just going to end up going to hell because they couldn't support this child. And I just remember thinking like, no, like, you know what, God is big enough. Even though in my own like theology I couldn't understand, I just remember just feeling so much like love for that person, like that, like there will be a better outcome from this, like if that's what you feel like the only thing that you can do, like that you need to take care of that, and that I would be there to support them if their parents weren't, or if the teachers or the pastors, whatever, weren't. And I just feel like, yeah, sometimes like in these situations, it's hopeless. And how much more life can we save if we would just be loving, you know? And whether or not we know when life begins or not, just like what is the best loving situation, and like how much more good like these facilities actually do as well. And like what happens if this all just gets shut down, and it gets shut down because they were being able to perform abortions, and now they can't, and all their other services are also taken away. Like, how loving is that? And I don't know. That's just where I'm at. I'm like, I don't know how we're going to deal with it this summer when we go home in the middle of that, and both of the sides of our family. It's just going to be interesting. And it was really cool to be able to talk to our kids about it in a way they would understand, just coming from the point of love. And I don't even remember having those types of conversations with my parents, but being able to talk to them of like, what would you do how would you show love to these people? Or how would you, what does this look like? So I just don't want anybody to ever have to feel guilty for supporting a loved one in a decision that they have to make, whether it's health or finance or whatever, around a possible baby being born, you know?
So good. Thank you, Charity. Yeah, that was brought home to me strongly in a woman who shared a testimony in our church when I was in the church I used to lead. And she talked about having made the choice to have an abortion, went off to college, found herself pregnant, knew having the abortion would condemn her to hell forever. That was her belief system. If I have this abortion, I'm a murderer and I'm going to hell. But decided that she would rather make that choice and condemn herself to hell than have to tell her dad she had had sex. This was her testimony and her story. She said, going to hell seemed like the better option than telling my dad I'd had sex with a young man. And again, the point of all of this is, if that's the environment we're creating with this belief system, you know, Jesus said, if a fruit tree doesn't bear fruit, you cut it off at the roots and you throw it in the fire. And I just would love for Christians and evangelicals and staunch anti-abortionists to really look at the fruit of our work. And it's interesting to me that this memo has come out, and this idea that we are going to face a place where the decision is going to be given back to the states. I don't see many Christians celebrating this, at least not loudly. They may be celebrating it internally, because I think it may be one of those, the dog that catches the car moments of what have we wrought. I know politically that side of the aisle is trying to do everything to focus on how did we get this leak rather than the consequences of their actions. And so, not to take that into the political realm, but why are we not celebrating this if it is the greatest victory for God that's been planned for a long, long time? I think something in us just knows there's some cruelty involved in this. There's some self-righteousness, perhaps. And again, you can hold whatever belief around the subject you like, and I will respect that. But I'm asking everybody to challenge themselves. What is the fruit of my heart out of my belief system in it? And we go with that. All right. Any other thoughts anybody wants to share before we go into communion?
Eric's hand is up.
Yeah, go ahead. I was just getting to that. Go ahead, Eric.
Hello. Yeah, I don't feel like I have a lot to contribute to the conversation of abortion itself, but I do think that it's very disingenuous of the pro-life movement to not institutionally, in the way that we know the church can move, do things to help prevent unwanted pregnancies, as well as offer more support to mothers who maybe don't feel like they have the financial ability to support a child. For instance, supporting movements of, I don't know, the states that I've been in aren't like this. Other states may be different, but as far as offering, free contraceptive, having more sex positive education, having more of a freedom to discuss, sex at church, having more resources available as far as either baby formula or other diapers. I know there are states that have these things, but even just having more better community support systems. Like, if you really don't want this to happen, then you need to put a safety net out there. You need to have other things in place if you want to cut down on this, because what we may be entering into, I don't know, I'm not old enough to remember prior to Roe versus Wade, but I feel like this is going to become very divisive in a way that we haven't seen, well, in a couple years, I guess.
Appreciate that, Eric. And that's a really good point. And I like to make that point often, that if we're really about saving pregnancies, the data shows the things you do to limit and lower the number of unwanted pregnancies is sex education, easy access to contraceptives, healthcare, childcare, family leave. Those are the things that lower cases of unwanted pregnancy. And so sometimes I do have to question, is it really about saving babies, or is it about a struggle? And the view, certainly from outside the church, would be, once the umbilical cord is cut, Christians no longer feel responsible for you. Only right until that point. And so again, if we're trying to share a good message of a good God and a Jesus who came to show us an identity of being loved by the God of heaven, we might be able to do this differently. So thank you for letting us share that. I hope, I appreciate you sharing, Charity, and I did get a little uncomfortable that we have all men chiming in on this, and so I'm glad Brenda and Charity felt free to chime in on this as well. Sorry, Lauren, did I miss something there? I saw your chat message.
No, I was just to your point about whether evangelicals are celebrating or not. It appears that at least Franklin Graham is.
Oh, is he?
Yes. No,
Well,
then again, he also posted that all of us are going to hell. So apparently progressive Christianity is sending people straight to hell. So, I don't know, whatever.
Well, if Franklin Graham's theology is correct, then once the Supreme Court overturns Roe v. Wade, we'll never have another hurricane. We'll never have another earthquake. Another natural disaster will never happen in the United States. So we'll hold him to that belief system and see what happens. So yeah. It's James, I see that comment. That's funny. All right, guys, let's take communion together. I want to be humble to people's hearts, but I do think we need to be able to have conversations like this. And so thank you guys for sharing very, very well today. And I hope there isn't anybody who feels like your opinion would not be welcome. That might be different to some of what has been said. So I want you to know you're welcome with those, with what is in your heart as well. So let's take our communion together today, whatever your implements are, my cranberry juice and cracker today. And I'm so glad you guys are here. And I just honor this moment of us together as human beings filled with souls that can connect to one another, walk alongside one another, love us in our worst and our best moments, and share those moments together. And grateful that Jesus came to teach and sozo us, to reconcile us to our identity as it was at creation. And I tell you today that you were created in whatever fashion you see that story of creation, and the God of heaven, the Spirit of goodness from heaven, declared you good and worthy and profound and purposeful and here for a reason. You're not a mistake. You're not happenstance. You are the most valuable property of the universe. And I acknowledge seeing that in you today, and we bless that in one another. So as we eat the cracker, the bread that represents the body of Christ, I acknowledge the beauty of who you are bodily, that you are fearfully and wonderfully made. You are a fantastic being in creation. I just say, take a moment as we eat together and just recognize the beauty of you, even though you know your flaws. You've been declared good and beautiful and capable of amazing things, and recognize the beauty of the bodily beings that are around you today. We bless this implement as we take it together and recognize the beauty of each other physically on this earth. Maybe even make sure you're in gallery view so you can kind of see everybody and just recognize even the ones that we only see names. We honor the beauty of one another. And as we drink, the drink that represents the blood, the Zoe, the life inside of us, the emotional and spiritual part of us. I'm learning more and more in this season that even those amongst us that science would call neurodivergent, that our mind works differently than other people's minds. I'm starting to believe neurodivergent is normal. that all of us have some divergence in us. And again, I declare that divergence is fearfully and wonderfully made. It is for a purpose in you. And I'm not calling bad good, but I'm calling your ability to be you is beautiful and wonderful and fearfully made and filled with purpose. And I acknowledge that together. I acknowledge that, and we acknowledge this together in one another. And maybe more importantly, just acknowledge in yourself that you love who you are emotionally and spiritually. And you may say today, oh, I need to be better. And I would agree, I need to be better, and I'm working to be better, but I just love myself today. Because that is the message that Jesus brought, that when we love ourselves, the love of heaven will flow through us to our neighbors. So I declare a love of self and to everybody I see on the screen today as we bless this drink together. Amen. Anything anybody like to share out of communion today?
So when you talked about neurodiverse, of course, as I just shared at the beginning, that is part of what we have in our family. And it's part of why I've come to see people differently than I did growing up. Not that I was not shown that we needed to love everyone in my family, but what you don't understand, you tend to, what I call other, push away. And it's brought a lot of issues around not being so-called typical, and into a sharper focus of, no, we are all human, and we have to be able to have room for the people who aren't like us. And it really doesn't matter too much in what way they are not like us. There are some that are dangerous to be around, but just generally speaking about, just because someone is different does not make them bad, but that is a huge human tendency. And to be able to say, no, I see the value of your humanity, even though you see things differently than I do, is pretty amazing statement of acceptance. Anyway, God sees us all. So
yeah. It's ironic. I was talking to a friend of mine who is in the LGBTQ plus queer community. And he was saying, as he was younger and realizing sexual and gender identity, the church was the place that was accepting. Being a young, effeminate boy, the church was the place this person was able to find acceptance, because the church is open to all people to come, but then found, in the story this person was telling me was like, then about 6 months in, I realized, oh, wait, I'm accepted in this package, but not in the full package. And so it's ironic that we can be so accepting in some ways, but then our dogma gets in the way of us fully loving people. So, and just the teaching of the depravity of humanity, of the evilness of flesh, just really takes away our humanity. And so part of my goal is to encourage people to embrace their humanity and to love it and love yourself. All right. Well, happy Mother's Day again. If you're near Central California tomorrow night, Heidi, we're looking forward to seeing you tomorrow night. Brendan, Mark, Brian, and Anisha. If you're near Central California, come to Fresno and join us. in Carol's backyard. And if you don't have the info, send me an email through my website, pastor-paul.com, or any of my social media spaces, and we'll get you directions and get you there. Wish we could have you all here with us. Yes, James, I see that in chat. I wish you could be there with us. And if anybody wants to zoom in, we'll zoom you in for a few minutes so you could say hi to everybody. Just let us know, maybe through the Facebook page or whatever. So love you guys. Have an amazing week. And Lauren and Charity, take us to community time.
Awesome. I will open up rooms, and unfortunately, I will not join you at Zoom at 3 a.m. my time tomorrow, Paul.